I lost my virginity to my biology teacher. I was 2 months away from turning 16. However, my first sexual experience happened when I was 7. There are those who would compare those two experiences as the same, who would classify what happened to me at the hands of men much older than me as equal forms of sexual assault or abuse. As I begin episode 217, I'm coming off a couple of weeks of pretty intense self-reflection, remembering, processing, and healing from not only what happened to me, but the words that people think they have the right to say about what happened to me, to me. Having a sexual experience at age 7 at the hands of someone who was supposed to be your parent, to me, is an egregious and unforgivable action. Much of the abuse at the hands of my father was gentle, was quiet. I wasn't asked to participate, and if I was, I just feigned sleep. I was never in physical pain, although I was humiliated and embarrassed and terrified. And there were times when what was happening to me didn't feel all that bad. 54 years later, that is still hard for me to process. How dare my body respond in any other way except revulsion? This brings me to a health class I taught at Concord High once. We were talking about sexual assault and the differences between boys and girls. And I alluded to the fact that excitement on the part of a boy would be an obvious thing, be easier controlled. My basic premise was that boys would somehow have more control over their body's response than girls. To which a male student in the front row, first seat, first column, said to me, "Oh, no, it doesn't. Your body can respond in ways that do not at all match with how you're feeling inside." And you could have heard a pin drop, because this was a young man, a teenager, admitting in front of a class of his peers that somebody had done something to him that made it look like he liked it, and he didn't. I was being observed that day. That was an intense lesson. I never forgot that boy or that lesson because it resonated so strongly with me. I didn't know what to do with those feelings at age 7. I did know that I didn't want what was happening to me to happen again, and I went out of my way to appease and please my father, to appease and please my mother, to keep my room clean and burn the pajamas. The ritualistic behaviors I began, I look back now and they're just heartbreaking. But at the time, it was all I could do to process and make sense of what was happening to me. And that was just the logistical piece. I could not process what was happening with my body. I learned much too soon that you could touch yourself and make things feel good. And that was unbelievably puzzling to me. My mom was very open about reproduction and where babies came from, but we didn't talk about sex in that regard. When I would come to learn of my mother's childhood and all the sexual abuse she endured, this made more sense. Her choice in men also makes more sense. As I grew up and endured about 7 more years of this periodic abuse, my compulsion and fascination with my body's response, both to what was happening to me from my abuser and what I could do to myself, was mostly terrifying and confusing. I mean, I wasn't some compulsive masturbator, that's not what I'm saying, but it was something that bewildered me. And I had 2 or 3 friends, and we would talk about these things because I wasn't the only one, with a vagina and the parts. All of us were clueless as to what all this meant. About 5th or 6th grade, we had, the health class and sex and all that, those conversations. We learned all about boys getting erections, boners, and sexual pleasure. We learned nothing about what sex was like for us, other than how to potentially prevent birth control. I told my mother of the abuse in the summer of 1976, and from then until November of 77, my father did not live in the house. Just over a year with my father out of my house to process and heal as best I could. And then in the middle of my freshman year of high school, my 9th grade year, my mother remarried my father, and now he's living in the house again. I was expected to believe, because he said so, that he was sorry, that he would never do it again, that he would make it up to me, and that we could be a family. To this day, I wonder what went on inside my mother's head to even ponder this as a possibility. But as a child that was told to be quiet from the age of 7 about anything that might threaten the balance of my mom and my dad, don't tell people this happened. It would make life hard for Daddy, and it would make life hard for me. Then I was told that I shouldn't tell anyone like my grandparents or family members, what Daddy had done because it would ruin his place in the family. It's not a secret I enjoyed keeping. I'd been keeping secrets my whole life, but apparently this was my job. Again, this was somehow my responsibility based on being the receiver of the abuse. I had a wonderful 8 weeks at gymnastics camp. I was free and safe. I didn't have to come home. Tried out for soccer cheering and made it, and got ready for high school, for my high school experience. What I was trying to create for myself, in hindsight, is as normal an experience as possible. And when I arrived home, in the mail was my high school schedule. And I remember opening it and looking at the teachers. And I had Mr. Smith for homeroom and Mr. McLeod for English. I had Mr. Serrard for math. I had Frau Crocker for German. But I had Mr. McMahon for science guy. And so my mother quickly said, you watch out for him. And she told me the story of a woman named Carolyn who had had a relationship with him, and he took it too far and it really traumatized her, and I should stay away. My initial reaction was one of piqued interest. I wonder what that all means. In my mind, I pictured a child abuser. I pictured someone like my dad. When I walked down the hall on the first floor of Concord High School into the science wing, clutching all my books and my backpack and my shakers, and I'm in my cheering outfit because we have a dismissal and a soccer game, I didn't know what to think or expect walking into bio class. But when I walked in, what I saw was not at all what I felt like my mother was warning me about. The class was fully engaged. The teacher was making jokes and laughing. I stood for a minute at the door because I was looking for a place to sit. All the seats seemed to be full. I didn't make much noise, and as I started to move forward to find a chair, science guy turned over and saw me, turned around and pointed at me and said, "Oh my God, those are the skinniest legs I have ever seen." I was horrified, but a tiny bit complimented. Yeah, I had skinny legs. I can't deny it. Incredibly skinny legs. My thigh gap was like Bering Straits. He then asked me, had I ever considered going out for track and being a runner? And I laughed and said, no, I'm asthmatic. Cheering is about as good as it gets for me. And so I sat down. And that began my slow but steady increase in feelings for science guy. Infatuation, crush, sexual tension, chemistry, love. He never once forced me to do anything. He never once snuck in my room at night and told me to be quiet. In fact, for a lot of my initial tries to get Bruce to notice me, he didn't. But his reputation was profound, and it didn't take long to get a list of names of girls that there were rumors that he'd been with. I chased them all down. I paid attention. I watched. And there were. I was not the first young person in Bruce's life, nor would I be the last. Why am I reliving all of this? Well, Science Guy died a few months ago, and I just found out a couple of weeks ago. And here's where the don't tell and be quiet and people may judge theme permeates. Science Guy had a child, and I came to know his child when I was with him all those years in high school. She was 3 and 4 and 5, just a little girl whom he was profoundly, deeply committed to and loved. I do remember in our times that we spent together outside of school, which were plenty, sometimes she was with us. And knowing what it's like to be somebody's secret friend, or being along with a mom and her secret friend, I was anxious about this. All the memories I have with Tom and my mother are shrouded in secrecy. Don't tell, don't tell, don't tell. When it would slip out of my little girl mouth, I got in huge amounts of trouble for that, or there was a huge fight. And I always worried about that in the situation with Science Guy. My entire sophomore year was framed with emergence. I let go of the cheering. I let go of the gymnastics. I was trying to be something I wasn't. I did some clubs, German club and yearbook club, and I didn't really have much going on after school. I'd come home and watch soap operas and do my homework. I had a good social life, and I had good friends from gymnastics that I kept. But Bruce filled a void that I didn't even know I had. And as our time after school increased, and then we began going for rides, like he'd say, leave school and walk up this road, and then he'd come and get me. I'd just get into his car away from the school. And we would drive and talk, and he'd play music on the radio. He was a poet, and he'd recite poetry, some that he'd written, some that favorites he had. He drove a Volkswagen Beetle, and Tom, my biological father, had one for years. And there was a smell to it that was familiar to me. And all of Tom's cars smelled the same over the years. And I remember getting into Science Guy's car and just being assaulted almost by the smell because it was the same. Maybe it was fermented alcohol in the breath. I don't know. I don't know what made it the same, but it was. My dad, my bio dad, my father, was a curious, intelligent, smart individual, a medical doctor, a medical hypnoanalyst, a poet, an avid reader, an avid lover of music and all things the arts, somebody that had acted. He was equal parts both, artist and scientist. And that's Science Guy. His death hit me really hard. I'm still really reeling from it, a couple of weeks after finding out about it. And in talking with his daughter and really processing so many things over the past year, she reached out about a year ago and we've been talking via message and text. It's a pretty profound story and one that some could just view as ugly and awful and disgusting. But I know that I am not the only one of his loves, whatever we were, that will be heartbroken and sad and affected by his death. Science Guy was an amazing photographer. He could look through the lens and capture things. He has a stack of pictures of me. I'm sure they're thrown away now. But I remember looking at them and thinking I was so ugly and my hair was so off and weird and I hated how I looked. But he didn't. He told me I was beautiful and I believed him. Months and months of our time together was that invisible, increasing thread of sexual tension. He ended up getting an apartment right near where I lived. I could walk there. If I cut through my backyard and the house behind us' backyard, I was at his house. It was that close. And I would find reasons to go out. Now, I was in 10th grade, so I didn't have a lot of reasons to go out, but I would say I'm going to walk to the store or I'm doing this or that. And I would go to his house, knock on the window or knock on the door. During all this time, Bruce was dating. I remember one time knocking on the window and he had a woman over there and I was horrified. And I understood that whatever it was we had. Now, let me be clear about why I understand this. I understood that whatever we had must be secret and was wrong. And I believe on some innate level, that's what made it exciting to me. Not consciously, cognitively exciting, nervous system exciting. All of the feelings that come with sexual pleasure or sex in general, human beings aren't designed to have sex at age 5. They aren't. There's a whole marriage of emotions and feelings and instincts that merge together in a good way when you're old enough and healthy enough to process sexual intimacy. So knowing that my body could feel good just by the touch, it could even feel good if I didn't like who was touching it. I had some control over it, but not much. Nobody seemed willing to talk about it, but it was definitely the girl's job to keep all things secret. All of this formed the perfect storm of the teenage girl who falls in love with a teacher or a coach. To me, he was a grown man. Whatever he said must be true. It was exciting. He wanted to be with me. I remember sitting at a basketball game and he had his camera and he was taking pictures. And he sat down next to me and he sat so close to me that the entire side of our legs touched. And I was on fire. I didn't even know what it meant. I just knew that I had never felt this way ever. I was out of my mind. I remember at a dance, we danced like students, like he danced with a ton of girls and he would go up and ask girls to dance, which I find is like, I guess a lot of teachers danced with the girls back then. I remember 2 or 3 other teachers that did this, but looking back on it now, a teacher clutching a girl to him at a high school dance. There were dances like every other weekend when I was in high school with live bands and things. And there'd be breaks. So he would chaperone the dance. And then there'd be a break and we'd all leave. You could leave. We'd go leave and drink and then we'd come back. I would leave with him. I would walk up the street and he'd pick me up. And sometimes we'd go back to the dance and sometimes we wouldn't. I went to an indoor track meet with him. I rode the bus. And Bruce basically just said, Barbara's thinking of doing spring track and she's just here to see what it's like. Now, the indoor track at UNH had a dirt infield and it was a dusty mess and I couldn't breathe by the time we got out of there. And I thought, no way will I ever do track. But we were watching high jump and he came and stood behind me and he pressed himself against my back. I'm sorry if I'm grossing you out, but the memory, it took my breath away and I felt so vital and so important and so beautiful. I joined spring track so that we could see each other every day. Track was starting and I was getting anxious, like I wouldn't be able to see him. He'd be busy. So I went to the sign-up meeting and had to get some forms signed by your parents. I joined the team. So I went running a couple of times before track started just to see if I could do it. No, I'd go about a half a mile. But the first day came, and I remember walking up to Coach Ludi, who was the head coach, and putting my paperwork in there and telling him I was going to be a star. I'm going to be a star. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I do remember that it was hard for me to see Bruce in his element like that. All the distance runners loved him, and he was lovable. Aside from the fact that he fell in love with high school girls, he was funny, he was a good coach, he had insight into running, he could connect running to other things. When I look at some of my greatest qualities as a coach, tons of them come from Coach Ludi. A lot of them come from David Hemery. A lot of them come from Bob Seveny, Joni Benoit. I've had amazing coaches. But a lot of them come from Bruce. I learned it from him. In one of the snarky comments on my Facebook post about Bruce's death, somebody said that they would like to think it was my hard work and perseverance that made me a good runner. Well, I'm quite sure all my hard work made me a good runner, but I wouldn't have even known I could be a runner if it weren't for Bruce and if it weren't for me going out for spring track. That will always and forever be connected to this human for me. A part of my life that saved me in so many ways is connected to a man who at age 33 had sex with a 15-year-old student athlete. I'm tired of couching these things. I had a wonderful talk with my therapist recently about all of it and how hard it was to reconcile all of this. I eulogized, wrote the obituary, and planned the funeral for my father, the guy that abused me starting at age 7. Nobody seemed to have a problem with this, and the struggles I've had around it are profound. Nobody felt to remind me that he was a child molester when I was grieving him. Somehow, his egregious act is forgiven because he's my father, in spite of the fact that he's my father. When I posted my grief around Bruce on social media, comments were so ugly that his daughter asked me to take the post down, that she felt she betrayed her dad. That resonated with me because, my goodness me, it is not a little 4-year-old girl's job to defend her dad, to hold on to his secrets so that he isn't betrayed, that it was somehow her job to protect him. Now, this comes from a place of love, let me be clear. And imagining what life may have been like as the daughter of science guy and the instability that might have occurred there, I get it. I also know that he was probably in a million ways a pretty magical dad, that most of her memories must be fantastic. He loved the ocean and water. He loved ecology and science. He wrote poetry. He read poetry. He listened to music. He photographed musicians. He photographed nature. He was so many things. One of which was a dude who liked young chicks. I don't know how else to say it. Is he a rapist? No, I don't think so. Not my definition of rape. I've been raped. There's a big difference between being too young to legally say yes while you enjoyed the entire experience versus being held down and told to be quiet. It's not the same. The first couple of weeks of spring track, I was terrible. I was last. I wheezed every day. I tried all the different events. I remember I was a natural hurdler, which isn't surprising because Tom, my bio dad, was a really good hurdler. But I lacked the speed, and there was no long hurdles races for girls back then. And so at the end of trying everything, I was placed with the distance runners. And part of me felt like a failure because all my popular friends were the multi-eventers. They did field events and they did relays and they sprinted. And part of me just felt like, oh, I can't do anything, so I'll just do the distance. And a lot of girls that came out for track just to be a part of a team were in the distance races. But I had a shift. So we would go running every day, these distance runs. And some were 3 miles and some were 5 miles. And I was always in the slow group, happily, with my friend Kim and my friend Julie, my friend Deb, right? We're all back there. Woohoo. Deb was kind of in the middle, but she liked to run slow with us sometimes. We'd go on these runs and I have to walk and I'd wheeze. But I'd come home every day and my parents would ask how it went. And I would say, well, I did okay, whatever. And I had a run. I don't know what changed in me. I think maybe the medicine clicked. And I remember catching up to the fast group. And it was this route called Fisk. So you go up Auburn Street, up Little Pond Road to the top of a hill, then you come down the hill and down Fisk Road. So at the top of the hill is a pond and a road called Via Tranquilla. And I caught up to Science Guy and Nanette and Kathy and Pam. And these were like the top three runners on the team. So Bruce turns around and he's like, "What are you doing here? Did someone give you a ride?" And I was just so excited. Like I kept looking at my legs and not believing that they were running. And I felt like they looked like runner legs. And I was like, no, I don't know. I just felt good. And so I stayed with them the whole rest of the way. The fast girls sped way up. I think they got a little competitive there. And so I ran for the most part with Bruce the rest of the way. And that was the beginning of it. We had done a workout around White's Park. I'm looking out my window right now at where this workout occurred. And we were running a mile to see how long it took us. And I remember I was in the 9-minute range the first time we did this. And we came back to do it again. It was like a week later just to see if we'd made some progress. Now I was in like my first one was like 7:40. And then I did like 7:10. And then my last one, I was under 7. I was like 6:50 or 6:45. I remember just being so proud of myself that Bruce was so happy with me. He started to call me superstar because I started winning the track meets. I'd win the mile, I'd win the 800. I made it all the way to New England's that year, all the way to the New England Championships where I placed 6th. I was 5th in the state, 4th in Division I, Class L's. And he began to call me superstar, and that was my nickname. And it was our code word for when we saw each other in the halls. I would look up at him and say, "Hey, coach." And he would look at me and say, "Hey, superstar." And that meant I love you too. Or if he saw me first and said, "Superstar," and I'd say, "Super coach." We had this back and forth. That public but secret communication, that leaning against me at a track meet, that sitting so close that we touched from shoulder to ankle, that slow dance, pressing me into him in words in the hallway. That's what my relationship with Bruce was like my whole sophomore year of high school. Was it wrong? In 100 ways, yes. Should he have been teaching? Probably not. Maybe college. Those women are older. Have there been older men that fall in love with younger women? All the time. If you're a Patriots fan, Bill Belichick's wife or girlfriend is young enough to be his great-granddaughter. Like, come on now. Old men and young women happen all the time. And there's criticism and explanation and justification and excuses for all of it. Nature isn't always normal, is it? Was Bruce's love for me normal? Probably not. Was my love for him normal? Probably not. But was it real? It was real. Was it sexual assault? Not the way I define sexual assault. Was it sexual impropriety? Sure. Was it inappropriate sexual contact? Absolutely, given the circumstances. I was not yet the age of consent, which I believe in New Hampshire at that time was 16. I was 2 months away from that. He was in a position of authority. He was an educator. When you get your teacher's contract, you're sort of signing on to the fact that you won't have sex with your students. But the number of teachers at Concord High School when I was there that went on to marry former students, it's significant, spanning several generations. The number of teachers at Concord High School that have lost their jobs for inappropriate sexual contact with students is also quite large. It does not make it right, but it certainly isn't unique. And while I don't pay attention to other schools so much, Concord certainly does seem to attract the pervs in that regard. I came in 4th in the Class L meet on May 25th, 1979, and made it to states. And Bruce was house sitting nearby, right close by. And I went over to see him the next day because I knew where he was house sitting. And one thing led to another. And now up to this point, we had been partially clothed with one another. I remember going to his apartment on Easter Sunday and falling asleep. Oh, we fell asleep in the bed, took a nap. We didn't have sex, but we did a lot of other things. I remember kissing him on his couch as my friends, Kathleen and Kathy, looked in the window from outside. We had inappropriate contact. But that day, we got pretty heavily involved, and he finally just said, "Do you want to make love?" And I was stymied. Quite honestly, it took me by surprise. And I'm like, "Yes. Let me go to the bathroom first." Ran into the bathroom. I'm all panicked. Do I want to do this? Do I not? And so we did. It wasn't at all what I expected. I actually thought it was pretty funny looking. Like I thought, oh my God, this is what people look like doing this. Movies try to make it look romantic and somehow poetic, but it was kind. It was gentle. I don't know. He knew at the time that I had never done it. I didn't give up that information. It was a Sunday afternoon. And then I went home and sat at the dinner table and wondered if anyone else knew. I know my mom always said she'd be able to tell, so I just kept waiting for her to say, "Ha, you had sex this afternoon." She didn't. I get real emotional right now because I think Every girl wants to have a really good first experience. In discounting my years of sexual abuse, I had a really good first experience. And there are those that would say only someone damaged by sexual abuse could think that that's a good experience. But in the moment, I was loved, I was called beautiful, I was caressed and cared for, I was treated nicely. I had things done to me that had never been done. Didn't know people did those things. Pleasantly surprised. And I had no one to tell. I walked around just, with no one to share these things with. Took driver's ed that summer, learned to drive. And at about that time, met Jay Kolb, who owned a running store in Concord called The Long Run. Wasn't quite as old as Bruce, 8 years younger, actually. His ex-wife had been my art teacher in middle school, junior high school. He would become my second significant long-term relationship after Bruce. Also, when I was in high school, that would be my senior year. In preparing for this episode and reliving a really profound and beautiful, albeit inappropriate aspect and part of my life, I did a lot of research on why people like me or why people do these things. And the overriding theme, along with a lack of boundaries, was an inappropriately early wiring of the brain to connect certain physical feelings with emotional feelings. So keeping a secret, anytime a kid is involved in a secret with a grown-up, it's exciting. Ooh, that grown-up trusts me. Being touched and having it feel good, but being conflicted about who's doing the touching and should it feel good. If it does feel good, what's wrong with me? And then if it doesn't feel good, what's wrong with me, right? For me, there was a whole lot of anger because I felt that everybody was telling me how I was supposed to recover from my sexual abuse. I was supposed to be okay that my dad was moving home. I was supposed to be okay keeping his secret so people didn't hate him for what he did to me. I was supposed to be okay with my mother imposing all these boundaries on me so I wouldn't meet some abuser when, quite frankly, she was probably dating one for 15 years. You have to look at my biological father and his parallels to my first love to understand that life is so many shades of gray. I know it was very difficult for Bruce to watch me fall in love with Jay. He got very angry more than once. At the same time, he had several girlfriends. My junior year, we were together on and off still. We couldn't, we couldn't define it. I wasn't going to not go out with high school boys because I wanted so badly to have a boyfriend, but rumors get around, and what high school boy is going to be with a girl that's having sex with a guy, with a man, right? My whole social stigma, my whole social status in high school was baffling anyway. I was always on the outside looking in long before Bruce. And then I put myself in an unreachable, untouchable place. I had a couple of high school boyfriends, a couple of hookups, like we all did, I guess. But watching Bruce go on dates was painful for me. I understood he had to. And I believed when he said they didn't mean anything. Of course they meant something. But he would probably say that I didn't mean anything to someone else if I was the other person. I see all that now. It was when I came back to Concord High in my late 20s and began teaching and coaching in the district that I had a really hard time reconciling what had happened to me because I saw the 15-year-olds on my teams and how little they looked and young and immature and childlike. And I couldn't reconcile the fact that somebody who was in their 30s found that attractive. That was hard for me at the time. And then there was a swath of other teachers, a whole group of teachers over the course of 2 or 3 years that were caught in various stages of inappropriate relationships with students. And in the counseling of one student, I shared what had happened to me. And I suggested she tell her parents about this teacher that she was involved with. That at the end of the day, if I could go back to high school and not do it, I would. I have to think if I was meant to be a good runner, I would have found the track team without Science Guy. I have a hard time separating it because his love for running is what made me love running so much. He loved running. It consumed him, and science and poetry and nature. But in the process of these teachers being held to task, Bruce's past came up. And I was asked, or rather told, that I needed to share my story with the school board to justify him and a bunch of other teachers being forced to resign. And so I sat before a 9-person board, a board that I'm a member of now, and shared the story of my first sexual experience. Talk about some re-victimization there, huh? Talk about, once again, asking Barb to bear the brunt of responsibility for the actions of others. This very same person, Chris Rath, who insisted I do this, would later force me to resign for a whole host of other reasons. She's a fine one, that lady. Shortly after that, I had somebody throw a rock at my window, and I had cars drive by my house late at night and yell things like, "You're a slut, you're a whore, leave McMahon alone." And I got really scared. I don't know who he hung out with, or I mean, I do know who he hung out with. In between that, graduating high school and teaching in the district, Bruce and I got together a bunch of times. We went out on a couple of actual dates. We hooked up after parties. We went running together. He was friendly with a lot of people that I had been friendly with when I lived in Concord. And so our paths continued to cross. And then when I came back, we coached together. He was the boys' cross country coach for a while, and I was the girls. And he was heavily involved at this time with another woman that he met when she was in high school. So here we are 10 years later. He's 10 years older, but his girlfriends remain the same age. And I think this is when I also realized whatever little tender piece of Bruce was broken inside, it was broken enough that this is the age he saw himself at. I don't know what caused those relationships to end. I know for me, it never got established enough to be a relationship. So back to him losing his job and the drive-bys. And the final straw for me was I was out running and a car swerved as if it was going to hit me. And I jumped off the road and fell into the pucka brush on the side. And they screamed out, "Leave McMahon alone." I called the police, and then I went to court and I got a restraining order. And we sat in the courtroom together, and I told my story and he told his, and he spoke with this really thick Scottish accent. It was bizarre to me at the time. I think it was a coping mechanism for him. Long story short, I was granted the protective order, and he had written a note, a letter, denying any connection with me when I was a high school student, denied it completely. Did acknowledge that he was my coach and that helping me break 5 minutes in the mile was one of the single greatest things he'd ever been a part of. He only would acknowledge that we had connected a couple of times when I was in my 20s. And that was devastating for me. 47 years later, I can still cry, happy, sad, emotional tears around being with Bruce. And I never had the chance to reconcile that. And, years went by. He was in his hometown from the day he left in 1996 until he died in 2025. There were tons of time I could have gone and found him and connected with him, and I didn't. I have a couple of friends here, and I would sometimes ask, how was he doing? And he's doing great and involved in a lot of things. I know that life wasn't easy for him, but in one 12-month period, I lost Mr. Higgins' dad at age 83, and 9 months later, Bruce at age 80. I didn't cry when my dad died. I was ready for his death. Probably the biggest difference is, at least Norm tried very much to reconcile and apologize and work to make himself better and acknowledge. We talked at length about the abuse itself and why it happened to the best he could describe and what it did to me. And he spent his life knowing that he would, in his mind, would pay for that when he died. And that was a lot for him to ponder. I never had any reconciliation with Bruce. I really would have loved to sit at a bar with him and talk about all those times and those experiences, and to let him know that I felt really bad about having to take part in his dismissal. I remember saying to Chris Rath, if I were a bank teller, could you hold my job over my head if I kept my story to myself? This is my past. I was malleable, though. I wanted to please. Another chronic sign of somebody that's been sexually abused or abused in general by parents is this massive desire to fawn and to please, to take care of the abuser, to make everything okay. Almost relates into Stockholm syndrome a little bit, right? Fight or flight, I passed right over those and I went into freeze. I made believe I was asleep when my dad was abusing me. And then I would take care of everybody and try to make everyone happy so it wouldn't happen again. And how that translates into Barb as an adult is I find men who have qualities that would attract them to someone like me, the abused part of me, the frantic, frenetic, I'll do anything, I'm easily malleable, you can manipulate me because I want to make you happy. I'm going to believe all the wonderful things you say, and I'm going to try like hell to make you say them again, even though I know you won't. I had a therapist say that I spend all my energy trying to get the boy who doesn't like me to like me. Meanwhile, 5 boys over here like me a lot, and they're really nice boys. And that is the story of my life again and again. So Science Guy died, and I'm really sad about that. I am not the only student or athlete or parishioner or neighbor or younger sister. To fall in love with somebody far too old or inappropriate and have a relationship with them. Books and stories and history, it's everywhere. It happens now. I do not need to be told or reminded of the faults of Science Guy. I have my own faults. I know what his are. To the best of a 15-year-old, quite damaged young girl's ability, I knew what I was getting into. I have mentioned this book before. It is called The Silence of Great Distance, and it chronicles the lives of a whole host of elite distance runners in the mid-'80s. When I read the book, I could make a list of all the other elite distance runners I knew that fit the profile of those described in this book. So many of us in relationships with our coaches and our teachers and our recreation directors and people in those roles. So many more of us connecting with college coaches. I dated Sev for a year and a half, another overly intelligent, incredibly sensitive person who didn't really understand boundaries too much. Science Guy died. And I know that he leaves behind a daughter that will spend a lot of time figuring out things that she'll never really understand. She wants to remember what he became in his years after leaving Concord, but there's a lot of us here that will never forget our experiences with him. In the days after I found out, I got in my car and I went and drove by all the places I knew he had lived. Sat in my car, went through the memories of things that happened there. His classroom doesn't exist anymore because the school was remodeled. But I know I can stand where it was. I can go to the top of the staircase and take a few steps forward and know that the door was right there. I got an A in statistics in graduate school because I went back to Concord High School, to Science Guy, and asked for a copy of the Bio 2 textbook because the chapter in statistics made it make so much sense. And I showed all of the work I was doing in the class to Science Guy, and he helped me sort it all out and explained it in a way that made sense. Got an A in that class. We built rat mazes and had a fridge in there to keep the water in our aquarium cold enough that it could be a saltwater aquarium. I remember driving to the beach with him to get water, salt water to put in the aquarium. He spent hours of his time on these projects in the classroom and, his young girlfriends, I guess. I don't know. I would love to get into a time machine and go back and just watch. If I ever clean my attic, I'll find all my journals. I believe I chronicled it all. So I'll wrap up here. Science Guy died and I don't quite know what to do with it. I'm writing a series of blog posts that go into much more detail than what I'm comfortable saying out loud. So keep a lookout for those on the website. And if you're somebody that had a first love or a first sexual experience or a situation like mine, I get it. Reach out if you want. I'll always chat. I actually could use an ear right now from somebody that understands. So I love you, Science Guy. I loved you then, and I love you now. So I'll wrap up by saying, be good to yourself. As twisted as this might sound, I think Science Guy was me being good to myself. I dictated all of that, went against my mother. Be good to someone else. I will do my best to be good to his family, to honor and respect his daughter and her memories of him, and to share whatever I can to make her journey easier. As always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.